Good afternoon and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio online lunchtime talk. These are live every Friday at 1 p.m, beaming out onto your smartphones, laptops, iPads and living room televisions. My name is Martin O'Leary and I'm the Pervasive Media Studio's creative technologist. These talks are our chance to throw open the digital doors of the Pervasive Media Studio and for you to hear more from the people who are part of our community or who are working on things that excite us. An especially big welcome to those of you who are new to the studio, for whom this may be the first time you're engaging with us. For all of you newcomers, here's a little bit about what we do. The Pervasive Media Studio is a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding, product development to performance art. We're a partnership between Watershed, the University of the West of England and the University of Bristol. We're a home for early ideas, for companies and a meeting place of both the creative and commercial industries. And we're a studio space, offering desk space, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free for our residents. And finally, we're a safe space for artists to take risks in their practice and make time for collaboration. Now, this week's talk is by longtime studio resident and founder of Limina Immersive, Catherine Allen. She'll be talking about the barriers to entry for immersive technology and how we can overcome these to widen the appeal of virtual reality. There'll be a Q&A at the end, with the talk running at around about 30 minutes. If you want to ask any questions, just pop them into that chat window. I'll pick them out to ask Catherine. Or if you like, you can tweet your questions to @PMStudioUK. A captioned version of this talk will be available here after the talk is finished. Now, before we start, there's no talk next week. We're taking the week off as Watershed prepares to reopen to the public on May the 18th, government regulations permitting. But we'll be back in 2 weeks' time on May the 14th with Michael Armstrong and Bronnie McCarthy from BBC R&D. They'll be talking about their new tools for building interactive and immersive experiences and how you too can get involved. You can get news on all of our future talks by following us on @PMStudioUK on Twitter, @Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, or by subscribing to our newsletter on our website. Please don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel, give the video a thumbs up. The more subscribers we get, the more likes we get, the more we can share stories like this. Please feel free to share this link now on any of your socials. For now, I'm going to hand over to Catherine.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, Martin. It's great to be here. And what we'll be talking about this lunchtime is what gets in the way to new audiences experiencing immersive content. What are those barriers? If we can overcome these barriers, then we can reach new people and we can broaden the market. We can grow the diversity of the audience base for this new medium. We need to know what the barriers are before we can overcome them, really. And so after having several years of running VR theatres, a bit like a sort of described by one of our audience members as a cross between a cinema and a spa, several years of running that since beginning of 2017, we have learned a lot about new audiences and what will bring them to creative cultural virtual reality and what might deter them, might put them off completely. And that is what I'm sharing with you today. So we'll be looking at the problems, these barriers that are faced, and then we'll be looking at how to overcome that. But before we start, I'll just give you a bit of background on Limina and our mission. So we were born out of the Pervasive Media Studio. The space, the community is incredibly close to our heart at the company. And I had actually just been working at the BBC before that, producing two of their first public-facing virtual reality experiences. One called Easter Rising Voice of a Rebel, that lets you live through the memories of a rebel in the Easter Rising in 1916. And it's very kind of dreamlike poetic experience, in no way photorealistic. And then the next piece I then exec producers called No Small Talk, and that is a talk show aimed at millennial women, which looks at really big ideas. The idea of no small talk being like, let's cut to the chase, let's talk about really, really big fundamental concepts. And it's a bit like being in a podcast where you're sitting there with the two fantastic podcasters, also TV presenters and novelists, Cherry Healy and Emma Gannon. You're sitting there with them in a coffee shop. They're having this fascinating discussion. You're like the third person in it, just maybe a bit quiet. They give you eye contact and you feel like you're there, like you're present. A bit like being there while the podcast is being recorded. So those two projects, Easter Rising, Voice Rebel, No Small Talk, I absolutely loved working on, especially when it's such a new medium. There's so much to be discovered. But I have to say there was a bit of a background niggle, the frustration that the audience wasn't that broad yet. It was people who had mainly bought their headsets, virtual reality headsets, for gaming purposes. And the demographic there can be quite narrow. It does tend to sort of focus around young men. So that meant that we, for instance, with No Small Talk, there were sometimes issues getting to the end audience, but also it meant that the feedback that we were getting when it launched, for instance, on the Oculus Store, for Easter Rising Voice of Rebel, was kind of seeing it along. It was looking at as if it was a game, so not much interactivity here, when it was a documentary. So seeing there was this opportunity really to reach broader audiences. And growing an excitement to doing that was the idea of Limina. And our goal really has been, ever since we started, to breach this chasm that exists from early adopters of new emerging technology to the early majority. And things can get really, when they get to the early majority, that's when it starts to feel mainstream. That's when it starts to feel like something that, your family and friends who maybe don't work in the technology space, who maybe don't consider themselves digital early adopters, that's when it just starts to become normalized, and so that's really, up here I've got a graph of the technology adoption life cycle, and you can see that there is this gap between early adopters and the early majority, and that gap there, it is notoriously difficult to cross. And some innovations don't actually make it across. So, for instance, the Google Glass. Do you remember that? That came out around about 2013, 2014. And I remember trying one on and thinking I was the coolest person at the conference, trying one on, having my photo taken. And in the end, actually, do you remember the term glass hole? That was something that became, there was a bit of a sort of emerging moral panic about it. It didn't manage to cross that chasm between early adopters and the early majority. And it sort of rolled back down, and they had to try again later on with, instead with enterprise. So there's no guarantee that a new emerging technology will cross this. And that what Limina is really focused on is in the creative cultural side of virtual reality, introducing it to new people to help it cross that chasm. And this is something that also kind of keeps me up at night, is the idea that we might actually get innovators and early adopters, the earliest stage of this adoption curve, making work that they love, and they've gone on this journey of discovery, but they're making work for themselves, their friends, community, within this sort of innovation crowd, showing it at, for instance, film festivals or tech conferences, expos, and people saying how wonderful that is, and it just keeps going round in a sort of cycle where it doesn't reach its potential with broader and more diverse audiences. So through running virtuality events and having a 6-month space supported by Watershed on the harbour side, we were able to reach thousands of new people who many told us they would not have experienced virtual reality otherwise. So that was, you may have visited, you may have seen, and that is one of the key data sources for this presentation. Other data sources as well, and we've been really lucky to be able to partner with universities. So not only have we got our own sales figures, social media figures, etc., our own surveys, we've also got some really academically robust research from partnerships with, for instance, Royal Holloway, King's College, Warwick University, Brighton, many universities. We've done a little bit of work with UE. We've had and support as well from them, and research with Watershed too. So we've really been working with, in terms of our data, some real experts, and having gathered so much data that we're super proud of. For finding things, we've seen some barriers and gaps. So this presentation today is essentially an introduction to and a summary of a report that I wrote last year called Beyond the Early Adopter, Widening the Appeal for Virtual Reality. And this is where we brought together all this research that we had done and our university partners had done, and put it together into one report that you can check out. I know that Martin's going to put the link in the chat later, and you can read for yourself. So I'll be giving you the headlines really. And then Lost in Song is another project we did last year, which is making a immersive singing experience that is designed to boost your mood, working with NHS, Arden and Gem and the choir ex cathedra. And because that was a demonstrator, we also run lots of research around that with the NHS. So we've learned quite a bit there as well with our NHS data. So that's where this research comes from. So let's dig in. Firstly, now this is the obvious one, okay? I'm starting with the barrier that gets talked about a lot. When this question comes up on panels or TV shows, radio, when they're talking about virtual reality, say, so why hasn't it gone mainstream? Haven't we been talking about this for a while? Hasn't this been a thing since the 90s? Why? What's stopping it? I've been asked that question so many times. And the answer that is kind of the most obvious and that many people give is the devices. They're big, they're clunky. Previously, not so much anymore, but previously there were issues around cyber sickness, especially in the 80s and the 90s. So there's the issues around the devices themselves, which is increasingly not becoming such a problem. I haven't felt cyber sickness, for instance, at all with any of the new generation of devices, and I've not heard much reports at all of that. But also, so that's getting better, and it doesn't feel so clunky. This new breed of device. There's still the cost issue, you know, that's still something that, look here, this is in dollars, but this is how much the Oculus Quest, which is becoming fast market leader, costs. 64 gig, $299, 256 gigabyte, it's $399 for the headset. These are serious purchases. Like you could get holiday with this, you know, this is not something that you can just, most people at least cannot frivolously decide. It's a serious purchase. And so that means when it is this level of purchase, you've got to have some really good reasons to decide to put your money into it. You know, it's got to be something that you feel maybe all your friends are doing, or that you know because you're within this community already, for instance, that other people are getting value from it. It's improving their lives, it improves your life, but it's not like a quick throwaway purchase for most people. So that's one major barrier with what's fast becoming the market leader, and the other headsets are similar price as well. Then this used to be the way around. This used to be one of the solutions. There were options. You didn't have to go straight in and, you know, drop £300 on a headset. You could have got one of these mobile-based virtual reality headsets. For instance, there was to do the Google Daydream View, which I was a big fan of, and there was the Gear VR. These you would put your phone into. They would work for specific phones, for instance, the Google Pixel, the Samsung Gear VR, Samsung phones for the Gear VR. And that meant that most people had, you know, a device in their pocket that would work pretty well as a virtual reality device already. And all they need to get is an add-on, which often came free with the phones anyway. This was like a gateway drug, many people would have said. But big stamp here, discontinued. These headsets a couple of years ago were pulled from no longer being sold, stopped being supported as well, the software for them. Reasons given by Google and by Samsung, both quite similar. They said it was battery drainage and it was a consumer frustration at not being able to do other things on your phone while in VR. Which is interesting because when you're in VR, generally you can't do things on your phone. But that they gave as the problem for its adoption. So these were discontinued. They used to be a bit of a gateway drug. Then another way that was a gateway, a way in pre-COVID and was doing really well was location-based VR. And this is where Limina fits in with our VR theatres. Us and many other providers would be a real quite an advanced way in. You could go and experience really cutting edge or very, you know, well-reviewed virtual reality with, featuring major brands from for us, Cirque du Soleil, or Star Wars for the Void. And this was a way that you could try it out, and it would fit in with your life. It would have a frame, a time and a place that felt natural, a bit like going to the cinema or theatre. This was the revenue capital annual growth, compound annual growth rate graph. This is from Mordor Intelligence, which shows the prediction back in 2019, what they thought it was going to grow. They thought that the compound annual growth rate would be 32.5%, which is fairly substantial. However, this was a prediction pre-COVID, so pre all these restrictions. Now, there's a lot of questions. We don't know what's going to happen. When things do open up, will location VR go back to what it was? Will it be different? A lot of these players in this market, even the ones that like fairly well known, like the Void, for instance, with their Star Wars partnership with Disney, they've had serious problems. There's been others as well. Steven Spielberg invested in Dreamscape in the States. That's also had problems. Even the ones that have had investment, it's still been a really tough time for them. So there's a lot of smaller companies, VR arcades that have been started up in various shopping centres. They may not have been able to, so small, so young, may not be able to continue. So we'll have to see what happens there. So what's the solution to this barrier? Well, I guess in order to offer a solution, I need to give you some context actually on who owns a VR headset in the UK, because currently, if you're looking at solving it right now, the only way is through home ownership of VR headsets. It's home entertainment. You could look through work as well, enterprise, but focusing on consumer, this is how. So we wanted to find out, this was back in January, we ran a survey. We wanted to find out who is using VR. Simple question. And we found it's really fascinating results. So we surveyed just over 3,500 people, British internet users. We found 4% of them had a VR headset. And most of these headsets are the ones that previous generation that you put mobile phone into. And 2.7% of the respondents, that's it, 2.7% of those respondents had that sort. But 1.7% of respondents had a high-end VR headset, which includes the Oculus Quest, the Rift, PlayStation VR, HTC Vive. And that means, when I did a bit of a calculation, that actually over 1 million UK residents own a high-end VR headset. The trouble with the mobile ones, because so many have been discontinued, is it's hard to look at that as a solution in the long term. But yeah, they own this, over 1 million residents own a high-end VR headset. And then this was another survey we ran with just over 2,000 respondents. 3% of UK internet users use VR at least once a week. And looking at that, so it worked out, it must mean that you've got more of a household model where the household has a headset. Maybe there's one sort of champion for the headset, the person who bought it, but the rest of the household will use it regularly. And I've seen that pattern with talking to our audience members about how they've carried on their journeys with VR, friends who have virtual reality headsets. So what's the immediate answer? Well, obviously we can hold out till in location, but if you are impatient and you want to solve this right now, then look at, if you don't want to encourage people to have to spend 300 quid on a headset, then households, the people in the household who aren't using VR, or maybe tried it once or twice, who could use that headset. So for instance, you might have a family where a teenage daughter has a headset, but maybe the parents aren't using it. They won't see it as their thing. So maybe encouraging them to see it as something that they could not just have a go on, but maybe use a bit more often, maybe if the daughter's okay with it. So there's just one example of how you can approach that device barrier without expecting people to drop more money on kit. Then another way is you could look at devices they already have and focus, for instance, like we did with Lost in Song. Primary device is 360 video on a desktop. And we still managed to have 81% of our participants experience a mood boost from singing in nature. in this it's not even virtual, 360 video experience. So you can get an immersive experience that does not involve headsets. Whether or not you would call that virtual reality or immersive technology is up for debate. Perception barriers. Now let's move on to this one. What we found so regularly talking to Limina VR audience members is people would say, I just didn't think this was for me. I thought it was something for my teenage nephew, Oh, I thought this was something that futuristic, is something of a future, maybe but not really of a present. We get people saying, oh, it's something that, if I was a gamer, I'd like it. There's this kind of imagery that comes into people's minds if you were to just go out onto local high street and ask people what comes into mind when you think of VR, it's quite likely it would be this sort of image. And these are, I've got a Shutterstock. They're some of the most popular images for virtual reality. Have you noticed also, it all looks like the same guy? I think it's different models though. So the trouble is though, it's quite funny that there's all these sort of sci-fi, futuristic, blue light, urban images, but they became quite hard actually to counter, to show our audience that VR can be for you. You don't have to be this white man in his 30s in order who likes gaming and is maybe a few years in the future to like virtual reality, to do virtual reality. It's not a futuristic boys' toy, Yes, this can be for our audience too. And yet these stereotypes, alas, they tend to be actually based on sort of reality, where this is some data from Global Web Index. So we can see that 23% of people have tried VR, but if you look from gender and age, it's really there's a real drop off at the age of 45 in terms of who's doing it. And this is people trying VR. If you look at gender between male and female there, they've got 30% of men and only 16% of women. So there are issues around the demographics of who's using, and it intersects as well in many different ways. The solution, when you have got this, you've got this issue on the demographics being very narrow, too narrow, in my opinion. And you've got this issue where the imagery also reinforces that and creates this cycle. How do you break it? Well, what we did was really proactively ensured that our marketing imagery did not reinforce those stereotypes. We use this sort of marketing imagery, regular, happy, beaming people who reflect our audience, who reflect the diversity of the audience as well, that we feel virtual reality should include. And then also topics of the content that we the content that we chose. And we'll talk a little bit more about content and advertising in a moment. But how this is relevant to the perception is we would choose topics and they would sell particularly well when it was just not what you would expect from virtual reality. We would veer away from things that were too futuristic, for instance. So for instance, oceans content sold really, really well. David Attenborough's Great Barrier Reef Dive, super popular at the VR theatre. Cirque du Soleil in virtual reality, really popular show of ours. People would go on date nights. It would be something that they really look forward to, or a girls' night out. Something combined with a cocktail afterwards. It just didn't feel very virtual reality-ish. And the way we marketed it was using amazing circus imagery, not the sort of imagery that you'd expect with this kind of thing. So there's a huge amount you can do with marketing imagery, and then your choice of topics as well. Okay, next is time barriers. So when we're looking at how to bring VR to these broader audiences, we've got to think about what's the nature of the time available. Who gets leisure time and who doesn't get leisure time? Leisure time is, it's a gift. It's not evenly distributed, very much not evenly distributed. And it's a resource. So just like money, time is a crucial resource, and there's loads of different competing offers for that resource, things to spend it on. So who has more of it? Who's time rich, who's time poor? Here's one example, looking at through the gender lens. Men get 5 hours more per week leisure time than women, according to an Office for National Statistics survey. A few years ago now, it's 2018, you see this research came out. Then they did some more 2015 So yeah, 2015, 2018, they both found that this dramatic gender gap, and then also other forms as well of where it's not distributed evenly. For instance, people who work in skilled trades get a lot less. People who live in Northern Ireland get a lot less. People who live in the north of England get a lot less. Young families don't get very much. So we've got this situation where, obviously bear in mind pre-COVID, but before COVID, it was getting worse. Rather than getting better. Between the year 2000 and 2015, looking at this from a gender perspective, we can see, this is from the Office for National Statistics website, this graph shows that between 2000 and 2015, men got less leisure time. Sorry, men got quite a lot more leisure time, and women got a bit less. So it will be interesting to see when things go back to some sort of normality post-COVID, how this leisure time situation maps out. So with this leisure time situation that we have, how do we counteract that? How do we work in a world where there is this sort of disparity? Well, one thing is thinking about the decision that people are making when they're deciding whether on how to spend that leisure time. So if you're offering something that's new, untested, bit like potentially weird, like virtual reality, that's an offer. But then another way you could spend your leisure time is watching the latest Marvel film, watching the latest Disney film, where you've liked every single other one of those Marvel films, or you really enjoyed Disney ever since you're a child. You know you're going to get some sort of value. It's going to be pleasurable. It's going to be a good choice of your leisure time. One's a risk and one's not. So which do you choose? So the way to package this new medium, if you want to reach these people who are time poor, but are still, I call sort of low-hanging fruit, they still could be somebody who could be a virtual reality audience member. The way to do that is to de-risk it for them, make it desirable, so make it something they really want to do, where there's a lot of pull factor, and make it safe in terms of duty of care, which we'll talk about shortly, so that they'll know they'll be looked after. They'll know that they won't get something that feels kind of weird and scary. They won't be worried about things like cyber sickness, for instance, but also de-risked in the sense of using familiarity. One of the great things many great things about having worked with Watershed over the years, but Watershed have built up over decades such a trusted brand in this region, and having here, you can see this is one of our adverts, supported by Watershed, and seeing that gives it this seal of, I love seeing films at Watershed. This helps de-risk this new thing for me. So something that you can do is look to venues or brands who have already spent a lot of time building up that trustedness with a diverse group, a diverse audience, and work with them, partner with them, find ways to get involved. So that's one thing. And then also topics, choose a zeitgeist topic that people feel familiar with. Oceans, for instance, well-being, mindfulness. Again, steering away from something that feels too of the future and not grounded in the present. So yeah, something that's pleasurable, something that feels de-risked in terms of topic. This was our most successful advert. You can see here that it's using imagery that has a sense of familiarity to it, and also includes this feeling of Watershed, for instance. You've got doing words, so they kind of know what they're going to do in VR as well. So there's some de-risking. Okay, my last set of barriers is anxiety barriers. If you have tried VR before, think about how you felt just before you were about to put that headset on for the first time. And if you haven't tried VR, then imagine how you might feel about to go into a full multi-sensory haptic virtual reality experience where you are going to be, I don't know, let's say wandering around a scary forest or something. How might you feel? A lot of people feel anxious. I felt anxious the first time I tried VR. Still do occasionally feel anxious. It's completely normal to feel anxious because it's so unknown. And so that's one thing, is you combine all these previous barriers that we just talked about, and it can create this sense of tension. This is an image I used to demonstrate how if this is similar to how a lot of people I know have tried VR for the first time, this conference or convention, you stand in a queue, you wait for your turn while watching others do it. Some people might pull some funny faces or look like they're about to fall over. So you've seen that happens. You know that you're next. You see they don't clean the headsets in between as well. But then it's your turn. And what are you worried about? You might be worried about privacy, feeling like a wally. Maybe your colleagues are there. Maybe they're taking photographs. You don't know, they might take photographs. You might be worried that the headset is dirty. Was it cleaned in between uses? You might have seen that it wasn't. So then you might be worried about, I think especially now people are more kind of switched on to this post-COVID, with COVID, about the cleanliness, the hygiene element. You might be feeling worried about your possessions, like where's your bag? If you haven't got a bag that you can maybe just put across you, then what is somebody looking after it? Is it safe? What about childcare? What if you've got children with you? Can you keep an eye on them while you're doing it? Will you fall over? Will it become a viral video clip? Will it be something that goes on to You've Been Framed, if that program still exists? These are real worries that people have. So what we find the solution is duty of care in exhibition. Really go for ensuring, looking at the things that people are worried about and ensuring that people know, even before they come, that it's all been addressed. So for instance, knowing there's not going to be anyone in the space that isn't either working on it as for instance, a VR host or a technician, or who's doing VR. There's no one who's going to take your photo. Photographs are banned. You know that there's always somebody you can ask. You know that there's no pressure to keep the headset on. And if you want to take it off, then you can close your eyes for a few seconds. You can breathe. If you still feel like you need to take it off, you can take it off. You can give people a toolkit. They know what to expect. Can often get called in education theory scaffolding around the experience, that framework. I bring up this slide because I know I've talked about cleanliness, but it's just so important now, more than ever, about anxiety. What are people, if you're going to be doing in location VR, you're going to be setting up something, you want people to feel confident and comfortable that those headsets are clean. So make sure that your cleaning process is well advertised as part of it, and visual, you know, like you could include a sign which includes the cleaning products you use, includes the ingredients as well. Something to be really aware of is the headset cleaning that you use as well as killing viruses and bacteria. It also needs to be something that is safe for skin. On the face, which is more sensitive than other skin. So we found these hospital wipes really good for medical devices. There are, I think there may be, with COVID though, that I think they've been quite hard to get hold of and potentially should be left for healthcare. But that's something that in the past, pre-COVID, we found was very good. So in conclusion, let's wrap up. What can we do? Well, to broaden VR audiences, we should be screening VR or making VR as an industry that genuinely works for first timers. Just if you are quite into virtual reality already and you've spent several years experiencing content, then unless you might want to make work for people who are that into this new medium, but likelihood is if you want a bigger audience, you're going to have to be making something for people who it's their first time. So empathize with your former self. Remember what that is like, because that is the level. It's like going to the cinema without having ever seen film before, you know. Empathize. Duty of care is everything, and you should get this across at every point in your marketing process, and obviously process itself as well. I've included on this slide some really positive tweets about how people maybe a bit nervous beforehand, but then they felt chilled, they felt calm, and it had an enjoyable experience. It's actually easier than most people assume to break out of that archetypal audience that we explored earlier. You can do it, because I think Limina, we received very little public funding directly. We had a lot of support from partners, but in terms of like direct cash, no, we were funded mainly from ticket sales and our like corporate consultancy. So if we can do this on pretty small budgets with a lot of support from our friends, but still pretty small budgets, imagine what a well-funded project could do. You know, there's so much potential. It's actually like we achieved a situation where our audience was, in terms of ethnicity, as diverse as the city of Bristol. When we were in Bristol, we had a female majority, where we had over 60% of our audience members being women. And we had a situation where, looking at age, a person over 55 was over 5 times more likely to click through on one of our adverts than a person under 24. So you think of all the stereotypes of VR being for like teenagers. No, we managed to get appeal to a really different demographic. So yes, good VR, everything I've told you. I really should give this caveat though, that it does depend on context. You know, we had a certain set of goals, a certain situation, but your projects, if you're going to be doing something, or with emerging technology in general, which a lot of this can apply to, it really will, if you like directly ported these principles into your project, as much as content, they're probably equal. So really remember the difference with different contexts, and what makes it good does vary context by context. So that's me for the presentation part, and now we're going to open it up to questions. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Catherine. That was phenomenal. Well done. Yeah, get your questions in. Please type away. Catherine is here to answer them. I'm going to kick off though. So you talked a lot about things pre-COVID. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a bit about what have you learned in the last year or so, and what do you think has changed, and where are we going to be, in 6 months' time when people start feeling comfortable putting a VR headset on again?
A great question, yeah. This time last year, I had serious worries about how we were going to cross this chasm, from the early adopters to the early majority, because there was issues with production of VR headsets due to COVID in China, meaning that the factories were closed or reduced capacity. So there was lots of issues around buying a VR headset for your home. So the only people who were doing it were people who already owned a headset. There was no in-location VR. You couldn't go around a friend's house and try VR. So for a while, that gap between that chasm felt kind of solid, and it was like, how are we going to do this? And it was, it was difficult to see that. But fast forward and to sort of October, November time last year, and when the Quest 2, when that had got over the issues with production, it was really, there was Oculus full-on launch mode, loads of advertising, the branding as well looked bright, fresh. It didn't feel too sort of like that sci-fi gimmicky look. Albeit it was quite focused on gaming. However, it seems we had as an industry, real pickup with home entertainment VR around the Christmas period. And actually what came out was some great diversity of the people using VR. And to be honest, I was skeptical when, so this was Facebook's leaders of their VR segment, which is pretty massive, 10,000 employees. Boz, he's called. That's his nickname, Boz. He was doing one of his keynotes where he was shared at one of their sort of update presentations about how it was going. He said, and we're appealing to lots more women, and this is something that we're really pleased about. And I was wondered, where's this data? I want to see. Give me the data, because this is something I have been banging this drum obviously for a long time. Tweeted him, no response. So when we ran our own survey, we could see, yes, it really was that pickup over Christmas. There really were more women using it. It was a difference. So we found 2.4%. This was in January. 2.4% of women internet users in the UK were using it at least once a week, and 2.9% of men. Now it's all increased, but that gap is nowhere near as big as it used to be. So actually being a regular VR user, we're not seeing so much of a gap there. So that was pretty good to see things getting a little bit better. And also this was from our research again. This was with BAFTA-winning University, looking as well at the BAME users of virtual reality. And it was actually, what was really good to see, broadly reflective actually of a population, but also around particular groups. For instance, South Asian people, there was an overrepresentation, which is fantastic, within the UK. So we are seeing some, in terms of like just looking at diversity and how we're crossing that chasm, like we're seeing some positive signs. So looking at, you know, demographics, one perspective, things are not as worrying as I thought. I thought things were going to be polarized, and they weren't so much. And looking to the future, there has been this real wave of people buying headsets who wouldn't have otherwise done, partly because of a pandemic. So I hope that that translates to a sort of pent up bottled demand when In Location can relaunch again, that people will, who don't own headsets, will want to, they really want to try it because their friends have been talking about it who do have it. You know, I think we're seeing this network effect. So I'm actually feeling really hopeful about virtual reality. We still got to be mindful of all the like reinforcing all the things that we've had issues with other sectors in regards to the broadness of audiences. We've still got to just keep on pushing for that inclusion. But yeah, it's not as awful as I was worried was going to happen this time last year.
Wow, that's good to hear. We are starting to get questions now from the chat, so I'm going to just hit you with some of those. So Stephen Holly asks, is one barrier the novelty factor overshadowing the genuine art of the content? And especially thinking in the context of things like 3D films, where the novelty really became its downfall.
Yeah, the gimmick can be seen still as a gimmick, and that's something that we have to, you know, if you're making virtual reality, that's one of those stereotypes you've got to dispel. I get asked so often, like, oh, isn't it going to be like 3D TV? I mean, I think you can see why, you know, things do often start though as a gimmick, and I can speak sort of disparagingly about gimmicks, but they also play a role. Like there's some value to it sometimes, because gimmick equals like taster, have a go, dip your toe in the water. And I think, you know, the early days of cinema, for instance, there was a lot that would have been described as gimmicky. People, the penny cinemas where you go and watch a short little bit of film for a penny, could have been perceived as gimmicky. Things were more like, often when there is a new technology, can be seen within media, within arts and culture, can be perceived that way. It doesn't mean that we should just go with it, but I think there's a role of people trying things out for the first time. And I guess what worries me about is like the content that people first try though, when they get a virtual reality device, or when their friend shows VR, someone who does own a headset, is what is it that they put on to give people that first experience. And a lot of people's first experience is either roller coasters, like kind of demo-y stuff, games, which can be good, depends on the game. Then yeah, also a lot is adult content. There was pre-pandemic this sort of strange trend that was a friend of mine who's sort of quite like London media socialite was saying, oh yes, this thing like celebrity parties or like magazine parties, like they'll have like an adult VR room, adult content. And so I guess that's something, if this is something how people try and VR, and I really hope that it's, you know, the sort of adult content that doesn't reinforce negative stereotypes, you know, that for instance more made by women. So that's something at Limina that we were aware that there's sort of this elephant in the room with virtual reality, is VR porn. Written about this for Wired magazine as well. Like it's there. Maybe we should be looking to make it more wholesome. And there's some really great women VR porn makers who I have met, who like just seem to be really on this mission. So yeah, when we look at gimmick, it's, I guess, the gimmick, like working within the gimmick, how can we make those gimmicks better? A better way in.
I have to say, I'm a big fan of a good gimmick. I love a gimmick. I think they get a bad name.
I feel like there's another lunchtime talk in defense of a gimmick.
Yeah. So actually following on from that, I had a question. Like, so some of the stuff that you mentioned as being like the gateway stuff, things like the Cirque du Soleil and the David Attenborough, that's feels like that's taking sort of big names from other media and putting them in VR. And do you think there's like a balance to be struck between that sort of content and the sort of more VR native stuff, which is probably better at showing off the power of the medium, rather than the stuff which is essentially a VR version of what could be a more traditional screen-based media?
The ideal situation, if you've got both, is you've got like a sort of VR like team who have spent quite a few years making VR, and they know what they're doing, they know the medium, they know if it works, they know it doesn't work. You've got that experienced team met with something audience members have heard of. It doesn't actually have to be like a big known brand like Cirque du Soleil or David Attenborough, though. It could be like a zeitgeist topic, something oceans or mindfulness, something that people what are talking about, looking, things that are on TV that are popular at the moment. You can look to that for inspiration. Look at the top 10 non-fiction books, for inspiration. Like what are the topics that people want? So for instance, you could see there's a big there has been for a long time, community around musicals, for instance. So tapping into that interest group, you don't necessarily have to get like Andrew Lloyd Webber on board. There's other, you can do something that's around the theme of musicals, say. So it's not, I don't think it's like limited, it only works if you've got a big brand, big name. You don't, it's good to pull people in, but you can you can get a good combination. And also, I should say, I talked about people who experienced in VR, but sometimes something I found at the BBC was that I noticed being like, having never worked before at the BBC, and having not much experience. Like I was in my late 20s, it's not like I'd spent like decades at the BBC and decades making documentaries, for instance. So somebody who only had a few years of experience in media, I still had a sort of freshness. And I found that quite useful with virtual reality. And because I'd worked in apps and before that I'd worked in TV, like I had quite a sort of broad overview of different types of media. So I saw VR quite like afresh, and because my degree before that was theatre as well. So having this sort of like portfolio career before then of like different art forms, I just found that was really, really useful. So I think sometimes like an open mind and not bringing baggage from other forms of media with you can be really good. And I think it might have been harder, if I was like, had spent decades working in TV making, to then go and make some VR might have been more difficult, because I've had to have unlearned some stuff, because you can't just port things over, it is a new medium, it's a new art form.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Wow. Always a fan of going where the medium takes you. So folks, we do have time for some more questions if you want to get them in, but I'm going to ask this one from Mark Jacobs, which is, I think, a good question for everyone, really. What's next for you, given these experiences? Where are you taking your own practice? And where is Limina going from here? If that's not too hard a question.
Yeah, well, we're going to make some announcements soon. What we're doing at the moment is as much about sharing what we've learned. Basically, it's if you have a look at this report, hopefully it will be helpful. It's more along this theme of understanding audiences, understanding participation, and sharing, because this industry, this sector, I have touched wood, I have a really good feeling about it. And we got to so many audience members, such a variety of audience members, pre-COVID, that I've spent the last year or so written a course for Future Learns, which is the Open University's platform for adult learning, like when you like lifelong learning, like when you can do like a 2-week short course, like most of it's free as well. So I wrote an introduction to VR course on that. I was co-lead educator on it. So that's something, education, not necessarily within a sort of FE or higher education context. So I do guest lectures and things like that, but sharing with organizations, businesses, people who want to be setting up virtual reality in location spaces, So yeah, sharing what we've learned and keeping on learning. It's a funny feeling last year, not having that like direct access to audience members all the time, and that's where we started running these surveys. And I have got so into running surveys. It's really like, getting really good quality data and seeing who's doing what and what people think and what their attitudes are. Like that's something that we've been weaving into our work. So yeah, that's we launched a project. I mentioned the one with the NHS, Arden and Jen. That's Arden and Greater East Midlands. We work with them to create with the choir called Ex Cathedra this singing in nature experience. So we're getting that out to various sort of NHS clinics and healthcare providers and care homes as well. We're distributing that out. Doesn't require any fancy equipment to run, just a computer or even a tablet plugged into a TV. So that's something that we want to be getting lost in song out as well. So sharing, learning, sharing what we've learned. But there's going to be announcements coming out soon, like what form that takes.
Great. I'll look forward to that, I think. So something I did want to ask, I'm sure there's many people watching this who've been inspired, who've immediately gone out and got next day delivery on an Oculus Quest or whatever. And so
if so, you should put me on commission.
What VR experiences at the moment would you recommend to people? What stuff do you think is out there that's exciting you right now?
This is probably more of a COVID related thing, but I've really got into having there's this app called Wander, which is like Google Street View but turned into turned into VR. It's still flat and obviously not moving, but you can just go somewhere. You can like teleport yourself somewhere. So me and Verity and Sammy Payne, Verity McIntosh and Sammy Payne, another studio resident, we met up in VR recently, and this was like full lockdown when we couldn't, you couldn't have met outside for even something small for a drink outdoors, and we had a virtual reality drink outside Arnolfini, and then we went for a walk. We went past Watershed. It was a Friday afternoon. So that's quite fun for like nostalgia or like feeling, you can explore the world, but we found the most fun things were when they were like really familiar, like well-loved places for us. So Wander is one app, which I think is really cool. And then the VR exercise, been getting very into this. I know a lot of people have as well. In fact, there was a study from a US firm called CTS research firm who found 60% of people who use their headset at least once a week use it for VR exercise. So yeah, I do most days. I do Beat Saber, or there's an app called Dance Central, which is it's like a bit like dancing in like a West End club around 2012. Like some really great songs, and you get so it's gamified, like you get score based on your dancing, and you don't even realize how much effort it does. A calorie counter, and afterwards I'm like, how did I manage that? It's quite distracting. So that I've been finding really, really fun. And while we can't dance in nightclubs in real life, then we've got there VR nightclubs. So yeah, Dance Central, obviously there's Beat Saber Classic, and Wander.
I have to say myself, I've definitely been on the Beat Saber quite a bit through lockdown, although I have found that it becomes less good exercise the better you get at it.
So true. I found that too.
You end up doing these very slight, precise motions rather than flailing around like a...
Yes. Yeah, when I first did it, I was like sweating, exhausted, and now, you kind of work out, you can just do this, can't you? For those who don't know Beat Saber, you've got these blocks that are coming towards you that represent the beats of the song, and it has an arrow, and you've got these lightsabers, and you need to splice through the beat with the arrow pointing in the right direction, and there's two different colors as well, so for instance like red and blue on each hand, and you have to match them. So it's a sort of like fast reaction music game. People who like drummers often tend to be quite good at it, if you've got that sync already, but it's that's so much fun, and it's a classic, and it's a great first time with VR. If you're showing somebody VR, I think it beats everything else, and it doesn't feel quite so, it doesn't feel like a gimmick.
Right. So you mentioned sort of in passing feeling like you should be on commission for
That was a
activism.
joke.
I realize this now, but how do you feel about like sort of acting as unpaid marketing for these big tech companies, that you are just selling their headsets?
Yeah, I mean, like the great thing about running VR theatre at Limina was because it was about the medium, it wasn't about the headset. And the trouble with the home entertainment, like if we're getting VR to broader audiences and we're looking at home entertainment, then that often involves buying a headset. And I do not work in the marketing department of any headset manufacturer, and I want to stay critical as well. Like there's some, like, I hope the role I see Limina is a critical friend where we spot issues, we spot issues on the horizon. We've done a lot around ethics as well. So it's been that kind of connection with audiences and participation, where, as well as, talking to potential and users of VR, we also talk a lot to the sector. So I've written this report, for instance. The audience for that is creative industries, but also it's gone, because it was with Nesta's Policy and Evidence Centre, that will have also gone to policymakers who make decisions, for instance, about where funding goes within this industry. And the report we had out a couple of years ago with Digital Catapult, it's called Immersive Formats for Future Audiences, that helped inform the industrial strategy, which then the government's industrial strategy, and including audiences of the future, to provide a language. So there's it's fun to say try VR, but actually like more interested in like having that connection with audiences and feeding back, spotting issues, spotting potential ethical concerns about adoption, looking for instance like VR's role in the online harms bill, which is coming up, I think will become quite a hot topic soon, and sharing that with politicians, policymakers, civil servants, etc. So yeah, I don't want to be a sort of one of those what do they call them, evangelists, don't they? Tech company evangelists. No, that's not Limina's role.
Great. Well,
critical friend.
I think that's all we've got time for today. So thank you very much, Catherine. It's been lovely as always to talk.
Thanks for having me. It's been so great to be able to share this, and thanks for your questions.
Great, thank you. And before we go, I just want to say to all of you, remember there's no talk next week. We're taking the week off as Watershed prepares to reopen to the public on May the 18th. Assuming no changes in the government's timeline. But we will be back in 2 weeks' time on May the 14th with Michael Armstrong and Bronnie McCarthy from BBC R&D. They'll be talking about their new tools for building interactive and immersive experiences and how you too can get involved. You can get news on all of our future talks by following us on @PM Studio UK on Twitter, @Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, or subscribe to the newsletter on our website. Please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, give the video a thumbs up. The more subscribers we get, the more likes we get, the more we can share stories like this. And please do feel free to share this link. A captioned version of the video will be available to watch again shortly after we finish up. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again soon.